It's a pleasure to have a moment here to share with you honoring Stuart Friedman. It's great that there's such a great turnout, and I see also that it just all through people's lives they maintain this feature of wanting to be far away from the front rows. That's a good thing. This morning, as I was gathering my thoughts a little bit for this, I did what all of us distracted people do these days. I went onto YouTube, and I saw, I looked up Stuart, and there he was giving a lecture at a symposium honoring Luis Alvarez. And it's a wonderful YouTube video where you can see him describing a little bit the arc of his career. And of course, emerging from it immediately is a great sense of his personality, very wry sense of humor, and his, of course, I think what you'll be exploring here in this symposium, you could just sense his incredibly deep dedication to really going as deeply as he can into understanding a problem and into wanting to find the true, correct answer, no matter how difficult or inconvenient it might be to get there. So those are qualities that are absolutely wonderful. And I thought I would also just mention here his connection to the laboratory. As you know, Stuart was deeply connected to Berkeley, having been both an undergraduate and a graduate student here. And as he mentioned even in the YouTube video, and I think probably many of you know, certainly when he started in his career, he was fiercely dedicated to wanting to be in his own laboratory doing things himself without being part of a big group. And I think one of the, if we examine any really great story, what we'll often find in it is the tension between a truly great individual and how they relate to a group or a society. And in Stuart's case, clearly there was a lot of evolution in his thinking, and he ultimately became deeply engaged at the laboratory in helping to provide some of the key ideas that shaped large group programs at the lab, including its participation in CamLand and other things that I'm sure you'll be discussing here in the next day. And so in many ways, when we think about our Berkeley community, we're trying always to foster truly exceptional individuals who think with great determination, and also people who can bring together many around them who will try to work and solve very hard problems. And so we were very fortunate to have Stuart here in the Berkeley environment, both at the university and at the laboratory. He left a great mark and was truly a wonderful human being and scientist. So I hope you'll be able to celebrate his life here today and welcome you all.
So I wanted to welcome you on behalf of Stuart's family, and in particular myself and Joyce Friedman, Stuart's wife, to the symposium Measuring Nothing and Getting It Right. And it's a brilliantly titled symposium for a number of reasons that I'll get into. But just so you know, there were some other options that the committee was thinking about that I think would have also been somewhat appropriate in a symposium about my father's legacy. There was being charismatic while being ornery. Which I think that was Fujikawa's top choice. There was a lifetime in teasing friends and hating bureaucrats, and I kind of like that one. I think this one comes from McEwen. Being a great collaborator without being good at collaboration, but particularly in China. And this one, I don't want to offend any Israelis in the audience, but this one was really good, arguing with Italians. My father really liked collaborating with Italians because they were really good at arguing, and then they would go have a drink afterwards, which is what my father liked to do best. But the title "Measuring Nothing and Getting It Right" is very appropriate and meaningful to me because it's something that I interacted with my father about. I talk to him about his propensity to find nothing in his experiments. And I remember an encounter I had with him very clearly. I was in my 20s. He must have been mid-50s then. It was over a glass of wine at his house behind the Claremont. And I think I've transcribed this conversation almost to detail. So I said something like, Dad, they only give prizes for finding something. You should really do experiments that find something, really, anything. And he said to me, in his way, he looked at me and he said, Paul, I'm not in charge of the fundamental design of the universe. And I mean, you can almost picture him saying that, right? And I said, well, Dad, if that's true, how come you always act like you are? But it is an interesting aspect of my father's career that he so often performed very elegant experiments that didn't measure anything. And you don't have to believe in the more philosophical interpretations of quantum mechanics to think that the observer is inextricably linked to the observation. And that's got to be true in so much as the observer gets to choose the experiments that they do. And it's actually interesting. In doing some research for this, I found that Luis Alvarez, the person who my father's chair was named for, also had a very elegant experiment that found a null result. He went to the pyramids of Giza, and by measuring muons coming through the pyramids, attempted to find any chambers, any secret chambers that had yet to be undiscovered. And the experiment was brilliant, and it was done so well that they could actually see the contours of the rock, and it turned out that they didn't have, there weren't any secret chambers. And when asked about it, Alvarez said, we didn't fail to find any chambers. What we showed is that there was no chambers to find. Very interesting. And the scientific writer, Chad Orzold, when talking about Alvarez's experiments and talking about other more recent experiments like ACME or LUX that also were brilliantly done but didn't find anything, he writes the following. This sort of work requires, as you might imagine, a certain personality type. You need to be able to go into an experiment expecting to detect nothing, but hoping to see something, and still get excited by a null result. It also demands a level of obsessive attention to statistical detail and experimental detail that is rare even among physicists. And I think, for the most part, this describes my father pretty well. Certainly the attention to detail, the excitement about an experiment that was done well, even with a null result. I'm not sure it describes him exactly, because I don't think he did every experiment expecting to find something. I think he wanted to find, I didn't know him at the time, it was before my time, but I think he wanted to find hidden variables. When I asked him why he would leave quantum mechanics after such a successful thesis experiment, he said it was just too bizarre. And when I thought that was interesting, because near the end of his career, he went into neutrinos, which from my understanding seem to have personality disorder. He starts with the bizarre and ends with the crazy. But in certain experiments, I don't think he didn't expect to find a 17 keV neutrino. He didn't expect to find cold fusion. He actually expected not to find it. So what kind of person goes into experiments without expecting to find the result, but still does it? I think there are four aspects of my father that made that a big aspect of his career. The first was the fundamental belief in experimental proof. He had a great admiration for elegant theories, string theory and supersymmetry. He thought they were great, but he wouldn't believe into it until he saw the data, until he saw the proof. He liked the beauty of thought experiments, and some physicists think thought experiments are the best form of experimental physics. My father didn't believe it. In fact, if he was in charge of the Schrodinger cat experiment, it would have looked something like this. He would have put the cat in the box, with the trigger and the poison, and he would have had a graduate student come every 5 minutes and check alive, dead, both, right? He wanted the data, he wanted the proof. The second is, he fundamentally didn't care about awards and accolades. He had undergraduate students be lead authors on papers. That wasn't what he was about. He cared about pursuing the truth. And there's actually, this is one of the things I admire most about my father. So when he was inducted to the American Academy, they they ask you to write a little speech about yourself. This is probably too small for you all to see. It's almost too small for me to read here. And the person before my father, when they walked across the stage, had written about, a 2-page essay on themselves about how there are 30,000 people alive every day who are only alive because of this person's contribution to solving some rare form of lymphoma cancer. And then my father comes up, and here's this, what he had written about himself. I'm interested in fundamental questions about certain particles, and experiments often exploit precision techniques in nuclear and atomic physics. There are often implications for astrophysics and cosmology. And, that's it. And what's even more interesting is he just took that from his website. So it's first line of his website. He didn't care. It was not at all a self-promoter. He cared about the science. He didn't care about the the glory of it. The other is a certain willingness to, let's say, be disagreeable. It takes a certain personality type and a willingness to be disagreeable, to go after an experiment that's got an interesting result, only to prove that the result was wrong. And some people misinterpret this. My father didn't care about proving that he was right. He just wanted to prove that you were wrong. Most fundamentally, he had a true respect for the laws of the universe, and in a sort of a disrespect for the laws of men, certainly of bureaucrats. But he always wanted to push back the frontiers of scientific knowledge, and he realized that takes as much knowing what the universe does as well as what the universe doesn't do. And when my, by the way, when I looked up the frontiers of scientific knowledge, did a Google search and a Google image search, this is the image that came up. So I don't know where that train's going, but it's going towards the frontiers of scientific knowledge. So when my father passed away, I lost a great father. My mother lost a great husband. But the world lost one of its greatest pursuers of truth. And in the days after his death, I sort of imagined, personified the forces of mystery out there, the forces that want to keep the secrets of the universe a secret. And I imagined them thinking, yeah, this is good. I'm going to rest easy tonight. Now that would have been a mistake, because my father's greatest legacy was in the contribution, the influence on his peers, the influence on his collaborators, the influences on his students. And with working with you all, he raised your standards, the way you look at the world, the way you carry out your experiments. And the greatest way to celebrate my father's legacy and my father as a person is to continue to do the type of work that he would have done, and to continue to pursue evidence at all costs, not to fall victim to sexy theories and hokey religions unless they are supported in evidence, to put the glory of the field above the glory of yourself. And a willingness to be disagreeable in the face of truth. You're allowed to tone it down a bit. And above all, to continue to, in his legacy, push back the frontiers of scientific knowledge. So welcome you all to the symposium, and thank you very much.